So this is exactly what my girlfriend and I were talking about, though. It's like you put in all this effort to have these like exterior fulfilling moments with someone else. Like you're on Tinder or a dating app and you're going to see this person and you're hoping that you have some intimacy or some connection or whatever. Maybe you're just trying to get laid. But if you use that 5 or so hours to just go on a date with yourself and invest back in you, how much more fulfilling that feels.
Yep.
And that, you know, she spent all this time getting ready and showering, and she's like, I was so exhausted, but I still wanted to get ready and feel like amazing to, meet with this guy. And she wasn't even interested in anything beyond sex, but really what she was looking for was fulfillment.
And connection. And I think that's like one of the big things is like wanting to connect so bad and coming back to ourselves and just being like, actually, I can connect with myself, and that often is more fulfilling. And that's like one thing that I'm really finding lately.
What is it like to date yourself?
Yeah.
How many people have dated themselves? Because I'm trying to date myself right now, and it's difficult.
It's extremely difficult, especially in those moments of like discomfort. Like sometimes in the evening, I'm just like, God, I'm fucking so uncomfortable right now, and I want to like get on Tinder and just like swipe, yeah, and move away from the discomfort that I'm feeling at an emotional level, at a physical level. Like, I just don't want to be with myself.
And what is the discomfort you're feeling?
Yeah, I would say kind of like loneliness. It's just like I really don't want to just sit with my own thoughts or questioning like what I'm doing with my life. Am I worthy? And sometimes it often is starting as like thoughts, and then it's manifesting physically, and then it's just like uncomfortable to sit in my body.
What does loneliness look like from a positive perspective?
Yeah, and sometimes I play with this idea of like, is it different? Are there different ideas between like being alone and being lonely? Like, these are kind of like different concepts in a way. And loneliness kind of gets a bad rap sometimes. Right? Like,
right.
And so what is like a positive way to be lonely and be like, I'm okay with that? And I don't know. Right now I am working with just like, yeah, I am lonely. And, from kind of this place of acceptance, it's like, I can notice that I'm feeling lonely, and it doesn't actually mean that like I'm worthless. So I feel like sometimes they're tied. Like, I'm lonely, that means like I'm unworthy of connection, or I'm unworthy of like somebody else being interested in like hanging out with me. I'm lonely, so that must mean that I'm not good enough, I'm stupid, I'm unattractive, right? And so how to like kind of shift to like, I'm lonely, but that actually doesn't mean anything about me as a person.
So the things I'm hearing from you are loneliness attached with like desperation.
Yeah, totally.
Or unwantedness. So now what about loneliness being solitude?
Right, and I think this is where sometimes people, and myself, we like separate these ideas of like, loneliness is something different than solitude. Whereas like when I think of solitude, I automatically think of like self-care, time alone. I'm choosing.
Exactly. Yeah. And that's what I was going to say. It's intentional.
Right.
It's a choice. So how do we choose loneliness intentionally?
Yeah. Yeah, and to be like, you know what? It is totally fine that I'm feeling lonely, and I don't have to move away from it. Like, I can just be lonely right now, and I am showing up
How
in
do
my
we
loneliness.
showing up in your loneliness?
Mm-hmm.
What does that look like?
So for me, last night it looked like doing some booty yoga.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm. Reading a little bit and just like going to bed at like 11:15 on a Friday night.
So how do we make loneliness our friend?
Mm-hmm.
And that is engaging.
Yep.
With
And I
it.
love this idea of making it intentional. Like, I'm choosing to be lonely right now. Because you can learn so much from being lonely.
What are the benefits?
Yeah, and so you and I have talked a little bit about, like, even in relationships with other people, we will often still feel lonely, right? And it's actually a really, it's an unreasonable expectation to think that someone else can make you feel connected all the time, or to always feel connected, right? Like, we all have to experience loneliness, and so the more comfortable we can become with it, the less we will use unhealthy vices to move away from it. The more we know ourselves.
Coping mechanisms to avoid the loneliness.
Yeah, which are often destructive.
Right. Instead of choosing the solitude.
Yep.
And that loneliness that is so much more familiar than choosing the solitude is because we're never taught how to sit with ourselves and to sit with our thoughts. Because it's scary and challenging to realistically look within, right?
And it's like often, it's not immediately like a reinforcing. Like, often we don't just feel good when we do that.
And that brings us to the instant gratification that we think these exterior swiping.
Looking on Instagram and seeing like a little heart from the latest post.
So, what kind of ideas could we come up with that are solitude's instant gratifications?
I don't know, I guess I have a harder time, like, because I don't know if it needs to be instant gratification. Like, I think it's retraining ourselves for delayed gratification and being okay with that.
I agree with you, but I'm also wondering if there can be like quick
Reinforcement.
or like quick tips toward
like
choosing.
Rewarding yourself. Like, I'm going to, when I feel lonely the next time, rather than getting on Tinder, or rather than checking my Instagram, or, you know, like looking at your ex's Facebook page, or doing all those things, I'm going to not. And I'm going to sit with my loneliness for 10 to 15 minutes.
Okay.
And then I'm going to reward myself with Netflix, or I'm going to reward myself with getting on Tinder and swiping, or I'm going to buy myself something, or...
So maybe what I really liked there is like the guidelines you just came up with. So maybe it's not so much the instant gratification as choosing some boundaries to it be more intentional with the solitude. So you're saying choose 10 or 15 minutes of the solitude, and then if you still want to...
If you still need it, allow yourself that time. And make that more intentional as well. So, and you were posting the other day, I think about, maybe even porn, you know, is a great example of like not being intentional with our vices or our as ways of escaping. leads to addiction.
Zoning out.
Leads to disconnection, exactly. Leads to being...
Numbing.
Numbing. A great word.
Numbing out.
Yeah. Leads to numbing out.
When you're exploring something that's supposed to be deeply connecting,
Mm-hmm.
it's supposed to be helping you feel more invigorated, more vibrational.
Mm-hmm.
And instead you're, by not choosing it,
Mm-hmm.
and not intentionally choosing it, you're making it
Right.
unhealthy.
You're basically using it to, like, remove the discomfort or the pain that you're in versus, like, using it to add something to your life. Right? Like, you can watch porn because you're like, oh, this makes me feel so good because when I just am using it to, like, pleasure myself versus, like, I'm using porn because I hate what's going on in my life and I can't stand, like, the discomfort of being alone. Two very different ways of approaching it. And I'm using this as an example because it's a little taboo to talk about, I think, porn use and just porn in general. But it could be anything. It could be eating. It could be sex with a
Right.
partner. It could be shopping. It could be anything.
Intentionally choosing numbing out versus, or not intentionally choosing and numbing out
Mhm.
versus intentionally choosing the uncomfortableness
Yep.
of being connected.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I love this idea and I love this topic of just kind of like, it's basically being mindful in everything that we do. And I so often like, and we all probably do this where it's like, I look back at my behavior and I'm like, why the fuck did I do that? And then I like come up with a story to explain why I did what I did versus like taking a moment, slowing down, and making a conscious choice to do that behavior. For me, drinking has been one of those things that I for a long time used drinking to numb out. And then it was like, oh, I have to be sober.
Mm-hmm.
And you know, which worked for a while. But then it became like, I actually do want to be able to drink sometimes. And so just becoming aware of the reasons why I'm drinking. Am I drinking because I'm in pain and I want to escape the pain? Or am I drinking to like connect and just have a good time and let loose? And it's not so much about either one of those things. Like if I consciously choose to escape pain, that's fine, but I'm making a conscious choice to do it.
Intention even behind choosing
To
to
numb out.
enjoy alcohol,
Mm-hmm.
right?
Or choosing to like bet I'm using this as a way of kind of like numbing
Mm-hmm.
because sometimes the discomfort does suck and it's okay to want to escape it, and sometimes it's okay to use a vice to escape it, but as long as you're like doing that with intention versus like, I don't even know why I'm watching so much porn, or I don't know why I'm drinking so much.
So what would intentionally choosing a vice as a coping mechanism look like?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, so I'm feeling really sad because I'm lonely and I don't really have, this is kind of a hypothetical, I don't have a lot of good friends right now. I'm in a new city and I just like don't really know what to do. So I acknowledge that I'm feeling really uncomfortable and I'm like, I don't want to be in this pain anymore right now. And so I'm going to go out and get drunk at the bar to avoid my pain. Right. Which is coming from a very different place than just like not acknowledging your pain, just like kind of doing things habitually, like without any thought behind it. Is that coming?
Yeah.
When you think of
So-
that, what are some examples for you?
So
Or like
I think what I'm hearing from you though is a layer of self-awareness that
Mhm.
already needs to be established, and I think that's what's
That's true.
important.
Yeah.
In because they being like, it's okay to use vices to self-medicate is,
Mm-hmm.
I think, comes with the preface that self-awareness is important first.
Yeah, I think you have to have that. Otherwise, you're just like setting yourself up for addiction.
So first we're talking about a strong foundation of being self-aware, being a skilled communicator with yourself
Yeah.
and your body,
Mm-hmm.
and that relationship.
Yeah. Yeah, you have to know your triggers. You have to know your compulsions. Like, you have to know what you're drawn to do to numb out.
Well, and triggers and numbing out, these are all very big buzzwords.
Yeah,
that
they
not
certainly are.
not everybody might be familiar with, right?
Mm-hmm.
So, you know, being triggered is a very popular term now. But I think, you know, up until recently, that might not even be in someone's vocabulary. So it's like, first we're talking about a level of self-awareness. Then we're talking about knowing within this internal meter of self-awareness what makes me happy, what makes me sad, what makes me upset, what makes me feel like I want to crawl into a hole, what makes me turned on.
Yeah.
So that's a lot of self-exploration right there that needs to be explored,
On your own.
determined, before even being able to really consider the self-medication or the self, you know, consciously choosing
Yeah.
things, right?
Yeah, definitely. That's a really good point, that, like, how do you even know what your triggers are if you don't take time to sit with yourself and be alone?
Which brings us back
to loneliness.
to choosing solitude, to choosing to be lonely, to go through the uncomfortable stuff to figure out what is going on inside of me. Who am I?
Yeah.
And without that, like, dedicated, conscious choice of being uncomfortable, you don't get those answers.
No, because if you're always around other people, you're going to always, unless you and your partner are both just really woke without ever doing this work, which is impossible, you know, you can use other people to avoid the discomfort forever.
Which takes us to dependency.